Soldiers Summit at the side of Destruction Bay in Yukon Territory. So this is a very short hike, but this hike is on the Alaskan Highway, which was built in 1942 during World War II, when the United States was concerned about the possibility of a Japanese invasion of Alaska. So they need to construct a highway connecting the lower 48 to Alaska, so that Alaska could be supported militarily or for any other strategic purposes. So the Alaskan Highway is right here. It's several thousand miles long. I forgot the exact length. But the hardest portion of the construction is really in the northern portion of British Columbia, Yukon Territory, and Alaska. Particularly in Yukon Territory and Alaska, because in this region the terrain is very mountainous, very rugged. At least in central South British Columbia, in between the Banff, the Canadian Rockies, and the Canadian coast, there is a big stretch of territory that is reasonably flat, level. I wouldn't say flat, reasonably easy to construct the highway. But if we look at this area, it's filled with rivers. This is a dry riverbed of the Destruction Bay, which is a massive bay. From the bay, on the edge of the bay, is the Alaskan Highway, right underneath. Right there is a single lane in both directions, so it's a two-lane road. In this section is pretty good, but I have driven through many sections that are still gravel or under construction. The quality of the road is severely impacted by the climate because of the winter. The permafrost underneath the highway compress and expand. It caused the so-called frost heaves, where the road, if you look closely, is like a ripple on the surface of water. And that ripple, when you drive fast, you cannot notice it. And then all of a sudden, your car just went down or go up, either way. So you have to be very, very careful, pay attention to the road condition. So that's frost heave. And of course, the frost heave also caused the pavement to buckle and crack. And the side of the shoulder of the road often split from the main road, create a lot of bad conditions, and of course a lot of potholes. So these road deteriorations are not something you can fix and then let it be good for many years. Basically, the road condition is so difficult to maintain. In the distance, there is some plane flying. I couldn't see it. They're so difficult to maintain. So as soon as the weather allows, the construction crews will go onto the road, section by section, repair the road. Sometimes only less than 100 feet. A section was severely damaged. They would have to repair that and then go back. So because of this, To drive on the Alaskan highway, it is quite common to have construction crews closing one lane and direct two-way traffic on a single lane road through a pilot car. The pilot car would drive back and forth, leading the traffic in one direction or the other, while the other lane is closed to traffic. So it is quite common to have this kind of road conditions wherever you drive on the Alaskan highway, and in fact on most of the Canadian highway system. Just look at this view. They set up a nice bench right here. You have this gorgeous view of the Destruction Bay. I don't know how this name came about, but it's a blue water, fresh water. It's pretty big. It's probably as big as Lake Tahoe. I don't know how deep it is, but because it's surrounded by glacial mountains, and these mountains would have to melt and drain into this region. Before the Europeans, the Canadians, or the Americans came to this region, of course, this is the territory of the First Nations, the Native Americans. Native in this case will be the Eskimos, the Inuits, or the original residents or the original inhabitants of this area. But with the construction of the Alaskan highway, I would assume it creates a condition in which the native Alaskans could easily travel along the highway to subsist on their own living. Well, the natives live on animal fats. They hunt. They are not farmers. They're hunters. So they hunt all kinds of animals. But the highway creates a corridor on which they hunt heavily, which eventually create an overhunting situation. In other words, all of the animals, I guess, are hunted and killed. So the Canadian government began to bar the Native Americans from hunting and drive them out, and that creates a lot of conflicts and tensions. To the natives, they believe this is my land, I can hunt. I guess to the Canadians, to the Canadian government, they think that you overhunted this area and the animals are all wiped out. So that lasted a long time. 4 decades later, the Native Americans finally gained their right to hunt again in this territory that their ancestor owned. But I don't know the details, but I would assume there must be some rules and regulations and limits on how much or how many animals they could hunt over a period of time or in a given territory, because otherwise they could overhunt again, because now they have hunting rifles, they have binoculars, they have modern weaponry that could easily hunt at a farther distance. They don't have to track and go after the animals. So with that in mind, the natives can still hunt, but likely under some rules and regulations. We see many signs on the roadside. This is a subsistence hunting area. But I've never heard any gunshots in the area, so maybe the hunting is not that frequent anyway. But just look at this landscape. Look at this surrounding area. During the summer, this is just gorgeous, just beautiful. This is a common sight. Even though this is Canada, but you see 2 flags. The 2 countries are like blood brothers. They're very close. And when I cross the border between the two countries, typically it's 1 or 2 minutes. Brief question: where are you going to? How long are you going to stay? You brought any weapons? Which I did. I declared. You brought any food that may be quarantined or anything? Usually nobody bring any anyway. So that's it. Then they just wave you through. So the border control here is entirely different from that of Mexico-U.S. border. I bet. This is such a beautiful area. The Alcan Military Highway, that's what it is called originally, the Alaska-Canada Military Highway, from Dawson Creek in British Columbia to Big Delta, Alaska, was opened here at Soldiers Summit on November 20th, 1942. That's just in the heat of the Second World War, relying on local native guides and generally following existing trails. United States military and civilian personnel finished the road in under 10 months. That's pretty quick. Intended to support the airfields of the Northwest staging route. Much of the road became part of the Alaskan Highway, and its completion in 1943 opened the Northwest to southern exploitation of natural resources, altering Yukon settlement patterns and changing native ways of life. Indeed, just like I mentioned, the natives are affected in one way or another. Just so beautiful. Just so beautiful. This is a little cliff. On the other side of the cliff is the Alaskan Highway. I can't see it because the cliff is too steep. This is a typical marker of Canada's scenic spots. Whenever there's a very scenic spot, they typically put two unique looking red launch chairs in here. You could sit here and enjoy the scenery. Oh yeah, that's really nice. So as soon as the Alcan Highway was constructed, the First Nations, the native people, began to move around the highway. In other words, they want to move and live around the highway because of the easier transportation. And their settlements began to cluster around the highway. And this is why their hunting habits, their living habits are significantly affected. Because if you live around the highway and you hunt around the highway, it's easier to move around. Of course, you create a situation of overhunting. Animals around the highway are all being depleted from the overhunting. And other activities are affected because the Native Americans began to take jobs that is not part of their original native lifestyle as laborers, as workers, and wage-earning jobs. More importantly, as we know, Native Americans have a very narrow gene pool, very shallow gene pool, because they came to North America through a very narrow bridge, land bridge, the Bering Strait. That was a land bridge during the ice ages. They crossed that, very small population. And the entire native population from North America to South America are offsprings of this small gene pool. And the lack of diversity means if the gene pool does not contain the inheritable traits of immunity against contagious diseases, it could be a problem. And that is indeed what happened. The contagious diseases from Europe, the smallpox, the other diseases are spreading so fast among the native population because they lack the immunity against it. Their genes have not built up the immunity through, unlike in Europe, where over the hundreds of years, over centuries, that the population has gone through Black Deaths and various other contagious diseases in close-quartered, inhabitable cities, that the genes are already mutated and evolved according to Darwin's theory of evolution. Those who have gene mutations that happen to be happens to be able to resist contagious disease are those who have offsprings. In fact, it is well known that today's population are actually from a smaller portion of the original ancient population, because those who do not have the disease resisting genes have already died off. So we are all offsprings of our ancestors who have immunity against these genes. But that is not the case for the natives, because their ancestors have never gone through this process. As a result, a large portion of them died from these contagious diseases, smallpox and measles, and what is the other, yellow fever or something, these contagious disease. So that also affected the population, the native population, with the construction of the Alcan Highway. Of course, similar things happened elsewhere in entire America, South, Central. I mean, the Europeans, as it is well known, during the European colonization process, once they realized the contagious disease can wipe out a large portion of native populations, they actually deliberately spread the disease by tossing coats, expensive clothing that is contaminated into the ground. And the natives did not know that. They picked it up and used them, and immediately they were sick. And in certain Native American tribes, up to 98% or even 99% of the population died off, because these diseases, unlike in Europe, they came in waves and gradually, and then the population with their gene mutation began to build immunity. But the Native Americans do not have that time window, do not have that longer time scale to respond to these diseases. So they quickly died off. And so most of the Native Americans today, as we know, there are very few of them who are pure. Most of them are already mixed with European genes. But of those who are remaining, those are the people who have these disease immune genes, and of the few. So this is this piece of history is actually common across the entire North, Central, and South America continent. Again, this is a classical case of theory of evolution at play, and the theory of evolution in combination with DNA and genetic theory together perfectly explained the history of how the natives died from these contagious diseases.